The call came at 11:37 p.m. on a Friday, just as Elaine Mercer was preparing to close a particularly grueling case file. The district attorney's office was empty save for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the occasional ping of late-night emails hitting her inbox. Elaine's neck ached from hours hunched over legal briefs, but the vibration of her phone against the polished mahogany of her desk jolted her upright. "Mom." The voice on the other end was unmistakably her son's, but there was something wrong. Noah's typically confident tone was replaced by something fragile, almost whispered. "Noah, what's wrong? Where are you?" Elaine's prosecutorial instincts kicked in immediately, cataloging details, assessing threats. "I'm at a gas station somewhere outside of Albuquerque, the HOA. They towed my car from Grandma's driveway. So I violated some overnight parking rule." His voice cracked. "I tried to explain I was just visiting for the weekend, but they wouldn't listen." Elaine's blood ran cold, then hot. Albuquerque was over 300 miles from their home in Denver. Noah had driven down yesterday to visit his grandmother, Elaine's mother, for her birthday weekend. He was supposed to be safe in the gated community where her mother had lived peacefully for 15 years. "How did you end up in Albuquerque?" Elaine asked, already reaching for her car keys, her mind calculating routes and travel times. "The towing company they contract with, it's based here. They brought my car to their main lot. Mom, they want $750 to release it, and I don't have that kind of money. The HOA president, some guy named Richard Wellman, he said rules are rules and that I should have registered as a visitor." Elaine closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. Richard Wellman. The name was now seared into her memory. "Did you tell them you're my son? That your grandmother lives there?" "I tried. The HOA guy just said that family connections don't exempt anyone from the rules." Then he smirked and said maybe next time I'd learn to read the community bylaws before parking wherever I want. The casual cruelty of it struck Elaine like a physical blow. Her 19-year-old son, stranded hundreds of miles from home at night without transportation or sufficient funds, all because of some petty power play by a homeowners association. "Stay put, Noah. I'm coming to get you." Elaine was already powering down her computer, mentally running through what she would need. "Text me the exact address and the name of the towing company. Are you safe where you are?" "Yeah, it's a well-lit place. There's a 24-hour diner next door. I can wait there." "Good. Order whatever you want. I'll be there as fast as I can." Elaine paused, her prosecutor's mind already formulating strategy. "And Noah, don't mention who I am to anyone else. Not yet." After hanging up, Elaine stood motionless for a moment in her office, the Denver skyline twinkling through her window like distant, cold stars. In 15 years as a prosecutor, she had faced down hardened criminals, corrupt officials, and corporate magnates who thought themselves above the law. She had built a reputation for being methodical, relentless, and fair. But this was different. This was her son. Elaine grabbed her emergency overnight bag, a habit from years of unexpected trial preparations, and headed for the parking garage. As the elevator descended, she pulled up the Sunshine Vista Homeowners Association website on her phone. Richard Wellman's smiling face greeted her from the board members page, his bio boasting about maintaining the highest community standards and strict enforcement of rules that preserve property values. By the time she reached her car, Elaine had already downloaded the complete HOA bylaws and covenant restrictions. She would read them during her first rest stop. If there was a loophole, a procedural error, or an overreach of authority, she would find it. Richard Wellman and the Sunshine Vista HOA had just made a catastrophic error. They had weaponized their petty authority against the wrong family, and they had absolutely no idea that the worried mother driving through the night to rescue her stranded son was also District Attorney Elaine Mercer, whose entire career was built on holding the powerful accountable when they abused their positions. As she pulled onto the empty highway, Elaine made herself a promise. This wouldn't end with simply retrieving Noah and his car. No, this was just the beginning. The headlights of Elaine's sit-in cut through the darkness of the desert highway. It was nearly 3 a.m. and she had been driving for over 3 hours, stopping only once to fuel up and buy a large black coffee that now sat half empty in her cup holder. Her eyes burned with fatigue, but the fury simmering inside her kept her alert and focused. At her single rest stop, she had methodically gone through the Sunshine Vista HOA bylaws, using the practiced eye of a prosecutor who had spent decades spotting inconsistencies and loopholes in legal documents. She had found several. The overnight parking restriction for visitors explicitly stated that immediate family members of residents should be registered but were exempt from towing penalties on first offenses. Moreover, any towing had to be preceded by a 24-hour written notice placed on the vehicle, something No confirmed had never happened. Richard Wellman hadn't just been overzealous. He had violated the HOA's own written policies. Elaine's phone rang through her car's Bluetooth, startling her from her thoughts. It was Laura Chen, her chief deputy district attorney and closest friend. "You do realize you're insane, right?" Laura said without preamble. You could have sent a car service to pick up Noah. I could have, Elaine agreed, but then I wouldn't get to look Richard Wellman in the eye when I explain exactly how many ways he's overstepped his authority. Laura sighed. At least tell me you're not planning to threaten him with criminal charges, because that would be an abuse of power. I know where the lines are, Laura. Elaine's grip tightened on the steering wheel. But there are other ways to hold people accountable, legal ways. Just remember who you are, Elaine. You've built your career on being the adult in the room, the one who follows procedure even when it's inconvenient. The reminder stung, but Elaine knew her friend was right. She had made her name prosecuting cases where others had abused their authority. Corrupt officials, officers who crossed lines, businesses that exploited their power over consumers. She couldn't become what she had spent her career fighting against. I'll be careful, she promised. But this isn't just about Noah. If they're doing this to my son, what are they doing to other visitors? To elderly residents who can't fight back? Someone needs to check their power. After ending the call with Laura, Elaine phoned her mother, Margaret, who answered on the first ring despite the late hour. I've been waiting to hear from you, the older woman said, her voice tight with anger. Those HOA vultures had no right. Noah was parked in my assigned space, not even in a guest spot. This was new information. He was in your designated parking space, but one included with your unit? Of course he was. Where else would I have him park? I haven't driven in 3 years, you know that. My space has been empty since I gave up my car. Elaine felt a cold smile form on her lips. And is your parking space mentioned specifically in your deed? It's on the plat map they gave me when I bought the place. Space 37, directly across from my front door. Perfect. That makes this even simpler. Elaine checked her GPS. I should be there by morning. I'll pick up Noah first and we'll deal with the HOA and the towing company together. Be careful, Elaine, her mother cautioned. Richard Wellman has friends on the city council. He's not used to being challenged. Neither am I, Mom. Elaine watched as a green highway sign for Albuquerque flashed by. Neither am I. The sky was just beginning to lighten on the eastern horizon when Elaine pulled into the gravel lot of the Desert Star Diner. Through the large windows, she could see Noah slumped in a booth, his dark hair falling over his forehead as he dozed with his head propped on his hand. Something inside her chest tightened at the sight of him. No longer of her little boy, but not quite fully grown either, vulnerable in his. Southwest Impound and Towing occupied a dusty lot surrounded by chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. In the harsh morning light, rows of vehicles baked under the New Mexico sun, a collection of misfortunes, each representing someone's bad day. Elaine and Noah approached the small prefabricated office building where a bored-looking man in his 50s sat behind a metal desk, a ceiling fan spinning lazily overhead. A nameplate identified him as Glenn Harding, manager. We're here about a vehicle that was towed yesterday from Sunshine Vista in Denver, Elaine said, her voice pleasant but firm. A 2018 Honda Civic registered to Noah Mercer. Glenn barely looked up from his computer. Yep. Out-of-state tow. $750 to release it. Cash or credit. Before we discuss payment, I'd like to see the towing authorization form, please. This made Glenn pause. He squinted at her. The what now? The towing authorization form, Elaine repeated. The document signed by an authorized representative of Sunshine Vista HOA specifically requesting the removal of this particular vehicle, including a certification that all prerequisites for towing under Colorado Revised Statutes 38 to 33.302 were met. Glenn's expression shifted from boredom to wariness. Lady, I just get the calls and send the trucks. We have a standing arrangement with Sunshine Vista. I understand that, Elaine said, smiling thinly. However, Colorado law requires specific documentation for each towing incident from an HOA property. Without that documentation, this constitutes unauthorized removal of private property. She placed her business card on the desk, her personal card and not her district attorney card, watching as Glenn examined it. You're a lawyer, he said flatly. I am, and I'm very familiar with towing regulations in both Colorado and New Mexico. Elaine leaned forward slightly. Now you have two options. You can release my son's vehicle immediately without charge, or I can call the New Mexico Attorney General's office and discuss potential patterns of improper towing practices. I'm sure they'd be interested in reviewing all your paperwork from the last few years. 30 minutes later, they were driving in tandem back toward Denver, Noah and his recovered Honda, Elaine following in her sit-in. No money had changed hands, and Glenn Harding had suddenly remembered that the company's policy was to waive fees in cases where proper documentation couldn't be located. It was nearly noon when they pulled into the manicured entrance of Sunshine Vista, a planned community of stucco homes with red-tiled roofs and carefully tended desert landscaping. Elaine had called ahead, and her mother was waiting on the front porch of her single-story home, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Margaret Mercer had been a force of nature in her younger days, the kind of elementary school principal who could silence a cafeteria with a single raised eyebrow. At 76, she had lost none of her formidable presence despite her diminutive stature and the silver that had replaced her once dark hair. "I call an emergency HOA meeting," Margaret announced without preamble as Elaine and Noah approached. 3 o'clock today." Richard tried to say it wasn't enough notice, but I reminded him that the bylaws allow for emergency meetings with 3 hours' notice for matters affecting resident safety. Elaine raised an eyebrow, and he agreed. He didn't have much choice. "I've already contacted 8 other residents who've had similar experiences. Visitors' cars towed without warning, excessive fines. They'll all be there." Margaret's eyes glinted with the same strategic sharpness that had served Elaine so well in the courtroom. Richard Wellman has been ruling this place like his personal fiefdom for too long. Inside, over sandwiches and iced tea, they finalized their approach. Elaine reviewed the HOA bylaws again, marking relevant sections with sticky notes. Noah pulled up the geolocation data from his phone, proving his car had been parked in Margaret's designated space and not in a visitor area or fire lane. "What do you think Wellman's game is?" Noah asked, examining a copy of the Sunshine Vista financial reports that Margaret had obtained as a board member several years earlier. "The HOA can't be making money from the towing company, can they?" "They might be," Elaine said, scanning the documents. "But more likely, this is about power and control. HOAs attract a certain type of person who enjoys enforcing rules on others." 2 weeks after the contentious HOA meeting, Elaine sat in her Denver office reviewing case files when her assistant knocked on the door. "District Attorney Hernandez on line 2 for you," she announced. Elaine picked up the phone. "Miguel, how are you?" "Busy, thanks to you," he replied, though his tone was good-natured. "The Sunshine Vista situation has opened quite the Pandora's box." "How bad is it?" Elaine asked, leaning back in her chair. "We've identified 17 different communities with similar arrangements. Richard Wellman isn't unique. He's just the one who got caught." Miguel's voice turned serious. "The forensic accountants found nearly $180,000 in undisclosed kickbacks from towing companies to various HOA board members across the county over the past 3 years." Elaine whistled softly. "That's more extensive than I expected." "It gets better," Miguel continued. "We traced some of these arrangements back to a consulting firm that specializes in revenue enhancement strategies for homeowners associations. They've been teaching this scheme as a best practice." "Are you pursuing charges?" "Against several individuals, yes, including your friend Wellman. Financial elder abuse, fraud, violation of fiduciary duty. But I'm calling because I'd like your help with something bigger." Elaine raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "We need legislative reform. The current statutes governing HOAs have too many loopholes. I know you've got a good relationship with the state attorney general. I was hoping you might be willing to co-chair a task force on HOA regulation reform." The request took Elaine by surprise. Her plate was already full with her regular caseload, not to mention the upcoming election season. But she thought of Noah stranded at that gas station, of her mother's neighbors paying exorbitant fees to recover their vehicles, of elderly residents on fixed incomes being exploited by the very organizations meant to protect their communities. "Count me in," she said decisively. After ending the call, Elaine stared thoughtfully out her office window. When she pursued justice for Noah, she'd been acting as a mother, not a district attorney. Yet somehow that personal quest had evolved into something with much broader implications, potentially changing how HOAs operated across the entire state. That evening, Elaine arrived at her mother's Sunshine Vista home for the newly elected HOA board's first official meeting. In the aftermath of the scandal, Richard Wellman had not only been removed from the board, but was now facing criminal charges. The community had held emergency elections, and to Elaine's amusement, Margaret had been elected the new board president by an overwhelming margin. "I tried to decline," Margaret explained as they walked to the community center together. "I'm too old for this nonsense." But no one else wanted to take on the mess Wellman left behind. "You'll do an excellent job," Elaine assured her. "You ran an elementary school for 30 years, and HOA should be simple by comparison." Margaret snorted. "Children are more reasonable than homeowners, trust me." The meeting room was packed again, but the atmosphere was markedly different from 2 weeks earlier. Gone was the tension and simmering resentment, replaced by cautious optimism and engaged discussion. Susan Ortiz, now serving as vice president, was presenting a draft of revised towing policies. And any vehicle belonging to a resident's family member will require explicit photographic evidence of a parking violation, documentation of a warning, and approval from 2 board members before towing can be authorized, she concluded. The residents applauded. Noah, who had insisted on attending despite having no actual stake in the community, leaned over to Elaine. "Think it'll work," he whispered. "For now," she replied, "until the next Richard Wellman comes along." "That's pretty cynical, Mom." Elaine smiled ruefully. "Not cynical. Realistic. Systems are only as good as the people running them, which is why transparency and accountability matters so much. She gestured around the room. But this is a start. People are paying attention now. After the meeting concluded, a small group gathered at Margaret's home for coffee and dessert. Susan was there, along with 2 other new board members and a retired judge who had volunteered to help rewrite the bylaws. District Attorney Hernandez called me today, Elaine told them, accepting a cup of coffee from her mother. He's forming a task force on HOA reform at the state level and asked me to co-chair. That's wonderful news, the retired judge said. These issues go far beyond Sunshine Vista. There needs to be stronger oversight. Margaret beamed with pride. My daughter, always fighting the big fights. I don't know about that, Elaine demurred. This all started because I was just a mom trying to help her son. Sometimes that's how the most important changes begin, Susan observed, from something deeply personal. Later, as Noah helped clear the dessert plates, he nudged Elaine gently. So was it worth it, driving through the night to rescue me? Elaine looked around at the people gathered in her mother's living room, individuals who had transformed from victims to advocates, from bystanders to engaged citizens. She thought about the statewide reform efforts now taking shape, the potential to protect thousands of homeowners from exploitation. It was worth every mile, she said, pulling him into a side hug. Though next time you visit Grandma, maybe we should get that visitor pass in advance. Noah laughed. Definitely. I've learned my lesson about parking regulations. And I've learned something too, Elaine admitted. Sometimes the most effective advocacy comes not from my title or position, but from simply being your mom. As the evening moved down and conversations shifted to lighter topics, Elaine found herself reflecting on the strange, unpredictable path that had led here. A midnight call, a stranded son, a petty HOA president with an inflated sense of power, all culminating in what might become landmark legislation protecting homeowners throughout Colorado. Justice worked in mysterious ways sometimes, and occasionally it began with a tow and Honda Civic and a very determined mother.